Hey, what's going on, guys? Zach Kleindinst here on the podcast from Push to Plush. Thank you so much for watching. Today, I have a special treat for everybody who is watching the podcast. I have a one-of-a-kind, modern-day Renaissance man here with Frank McKinney. Frank McKinney, to give you guys a quick background on his story. He is a 7-time best-selling author. He has ran the Badwater Marathon, I believe, 12 times and completed it 7 times, which is ridiculous. Beyond pushing his body to the limits. He's been featured on media and publications throughout the last 20 to 30 years, featuring HGTV, the Discovery Channel, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, you name it. The list can go on. But the one thing that I've really noticed Frank for is his real estate artistry. He's built 44 oceanfront mansions right here in South Florida, and he's been able to sell them for right around a $14 million average price tag. They're beautiful. My wife and I saw his properties a long time ago in some magazines, and that's when I first heard the name Frank McKinney, and we were actually living in Pennsylvania. We weren't even down here in South Florida. Also, he's a philanthro-capitalist, meaning Frank has developed and helped he's built 30 self-sustaining villages in Haiti. He's provided thousands and thousands of children and their families with running water, food, community services, churches, schools, shelter, you name it. So to say I'm honored and blessed to have Frank on the podcast is a huge understatement. Frank, I want to thank you so much for your time today. And I want to talk about your book, Aspire. And I just want to say thank you again for taking your time.
Very cool introduction, Zach. I didn't know you were in my backyard or I'd have you over. We could have done this live in, where I live. I'm not in the treehouse anymore. We sold the house that had the treehouse after 25 years. For those of you listening or watching, I wrote all 7 of my books and the 8th one that's coming out next year from my treehouse office, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. So that's where where the magic happened. And I'm excited to, sit here and talk about Aspire or, whatever you want to talk about. I'm honored, Zach.
Yeah, Frank, I really want to talk about Aspire because that's the first book I've ever read of yours. And when I followed you on Facebook, I saw that you published the book and I bought the book right away. And I want to go over this because I just went over all of your accolades. So the viewers now know who Frank McKinney is, which again, you don't need an introduction. They probably knew who you were before this. But one of the first things in your introduction that you put in there was a quote from Rocket Man. Mm-hmm. And it said, let me try to catch this real quick. Let me see here. What did it say?
I got you. Kill the person.
So you got to kill the person you were born to be the person you want to be.
Right.
Right. So My question to Frank, who was Frank McKinney before all of these accolades came about?
To put that in context, if you think about my book, Aspire, in the first section of Aspire, the first five chapters delineate the difference between motivation, inspiration, and aspiration. In a nutshell, we don't have time to go over the whole book. I'd prefer you buy the book so you can learn for yourself. Motivation washes off and goes down the drain with the soap at night. So if I motivated you today or Zach motivated you today, we failed you. Inspiration lasts about as long as a bad sunburn, but eventually, a week or so, it dissipates, just like a bad sunburn. Aspiration alters the DNA and allows you to create your own reality. And in my case, I was, still am, I guess, a corn-fed country boy from Indiana who went to 4 high schools in 4 years, spent 7 different stints in juvenile detention. I was turning my beautiful mother to turn prematurely gray with all the trouble I was getting in. So I needed to take out, let's use the iPhone as the prop. I needed to take out the eraser of life, turn around to the chalkboard of life and erase what was. And that involved hopping on a plane with a $50 bill and a one-way plane ticket from Indiana to South Florida in the 80s. So, Zach, I killed the person I was born to be, which was one of 2 things, likely one of 2 things. I was born to be a banker because my grandfather was a banker and my father was a banker. I didn't want to be a banker. I mean, do I look like I'd be a banker? No, I didn't want to be a banker. Or I was going to be a criminal because of all these times I was getting in trouble with the law and being locked up in juvenile detention. When I got on that plane, I killed the person I was born to be, banker or criminal, and became the person I wanted to be. I left that with the eraser of life, the metaphorical eraser of life, left it behind, landed on the tarmac in West Palm, and started to pursue my professional highest calling.
That's phenomenal. And Frank, that highest calling from what I can see is the real estate world, correct? It's the development of art within real estate. Is that correct? Or what was that aspiration that you found when you first came to West Palm? Did it take you time to figure that out? Or did you know right away what it was?
Not at all. Listen, I was 18 years old. I had 50 bucks in my pocket. There's nothing, extraordinary about having 50 bucks at 18. Like, who has more than $50? But listen, I knew that there was going to be a professional highest calling beyond just being a maintenance worker on a golf course, which is really what I was. Not really, that's what I was when I first landed. I was maintaining the golf course with other Haitians. I earned the nickname the White Haitian, digging sand traps with a shovel, at the very beginning days of being in South Florida. I was around affluence, Zach. I was around people who could play golf all day long. I was maintaining the golf course, and I'd see these people come out and play golf and never seem to work. So I wanted a piece of that. Like, how was I going to get a piece of that without education, network, connections, financing, friends? So I went to school on the ultra wealthy by not only watching them and talking to them on the golf course, but I became a tennis instructor. I was a really good tennis player as a young boy. I was ranked in the top 10 in the Midwest and top 3 in the state of Indiana. I became a tennis pro. I picked up the racket, got my timing back. I'd given that up for this life of crime when I was a juvenile delinquent, which was kind of sad because I was really good at tennis. But I picked up the racket, got my timing back. I started giving tennis lessons to the ultra wealthy. And back in the day, there was a show on TV called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. For those of you who are about my age, you will remember that. For you young people, it would be MTV Cribs. Very similar shows, a voyeuristic look inside the lifestyles of rich and famous. Zach, I wanted that. I wanted a piece of that lifestyle, but how was I going to get it? So as a tennis instructor, I'm teaching people who drive up to their tennis lesson in Mercedes or Ferraris. They have a $2 million house. They have a Beyonce lookalike wife. They got 2 beautiful kids. They got a mansion. They got a yacht. How? Let's say you're my tennis student. I want to learn from Zach. How did you get to live this lifestyle? I would purposely, you're 76 feet on the other side of the net. I would purposely tire you out after 45 minutes of an hour-long tennis lesson. So you had to sit down, couldn't finish, and I would ask you the question, Zach, how did you get here? I did that, Zach, over a 2-year span, and I earned my PhD in entrepreneurship, my master's in real estate, because most of the people I was teaching tennis to made their fortune in real estate. So I came off the maintenance worker on the golf course, maintenance worker on the tennis courts, tennis pro making $100,000 a year. I was making good money at 19 years old. I had a Ferrari when I was 19 from just teaching tennis.
Wow.
But I realized there was a limit. There was a limit. Hourly, I was being paid 50 bucks an hour. I still have friends that are tennis pros that are probably making 25 grand more now than I was 35 years ago. The people who I was teaching tennis to, the ones who gave me that PhD in entrepreneurship, encouraged me to get involved in real estate. And in the late 80s, I bought a crack house. And before flip was even a thing, like the adjective flip was used in gymnastics, it wasn't even used in real estate. We started flipping these crack houses. And by the end of the time I was done and I moved to the oceanfront, we had done hundreds of small houses, none of them worth more than $100,000, by the way. I went from $100,000 max crack house, which today would be like a $250,000 house, to a $2 million house. There was nothing in between. But from that first crack house all the way to and that was a $50,000 crack house. The most expensive spec house I ever did was a $50 million house on the ocean on spec. Difference between 50,000 and 50 million. Each house, I took an artist approach to the craft. I became a real estate artist. I made those the nicest little crack houses on the block when I did them. And if you go to my webpage, you'll see some of the most beautiful oceanfront mansions ever created in the history of history. Again, through applying real estate artistry, that craft that I learned from my tennis students that encouraged me to get involved in real estate.
What made you decide to go high end like that? Like, where did that artist, have you always been like that kind of artist and have that type of instinct in you, or how did that come about?
So it's really important for those of you listening or watching, you may be looking at me and say, okay, yeah, he's a creative. Yep, he looks like an artist. I'm a businessman first. artist distant second. I have mastered the ability to be able to toggle back and forth between right brain and left brain. Unfortunately, we're taught that we are either right brain or left brain dominant, right brain being creative, left brain being statistical, analytical, and business minded. Well, over a decade span or more, I came to Florida as a left brain dominant individual. My dad being a banker, my grandfather being a banker, I knew numbers, I knew statistics, I knew spreadsheets. I didn't know creative. I decided to wake up the right side of my brain so that now I toggle back and forth between creativity and the business side. So when I'm building, let's say, a $20 million spec house, you better believe it's got to make business sense first before I start putting in the, aquarium wet bars and the jelly spheres and the countertops that are made out of lava from France and all these things that I do artistically. My formula in real estate, be it a $50,000 crack house or a $50 million spec house on the ocean, hasn't deviated. My financial formula, my money formula is as follows: acquisition basis. So what it cost me to buy the opportunity, be raw land or something I would renovate and sell, acquisition basis plus improvement basis, building it new from the ground up or putting a coat of paint on it and flipping it. Acquisition basis plus improvement basis should never or rarely equal more than 65% of retail. So I put all of my deals that I look at through that filter. If the 1 out of 50 meets that criteria, 1 out of 20, whatever, it's not very many, then I pursue it. Then I switch on the right side of the brain and we get into this artistry, because the ultra wealthy want what they can't have. They want something they've never seen before. They've experienced so much more than you and I can even imagine. It's up to me to give them something that they want before they know they even want it. And that's what we've done 44 houses on the direct oceanfront with an average selling price of $14 million after we left the first time home buyer market.
That's incredible.
All on spec though. Here's the difference, at least with my personality. Like Van Gogh or Renoir or Monet or Michelangelo, I create not two-dimensional art like those guys painted. I create three-dimensional art. I put a for sale sign in the ground, and you either like it or you don't. You either love it or you hate it. I do not build custom homes, meaning you and your wife wouldn't hire me. Well, you might try, but I wouldn't allow you to hire me. I like building my art, putting it on the market, on that sun-drenched canvas known as the Atlantic Ocean, putting a for sale sign in the ground, and you either drive in the driveway, walk in the front door and love it, buy it, or you don't.
That's phenomenal, man. I love that. That's crazy. So I'm in real estate myself. So I help folks buy and sell real estate. I think everybody down here in South Florida does. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, York, Pennsylvania. And when I came down here, I guess my question to you is too, it's kind of a random question here, but how was that when you went from, because I used to flip properties as well. I haven't flipped a house in 2 years. But when my first house, I bought it for 40. We put 25 into it. We sold it for 110, right? Like that was my market up in Pennsylvania. So for me, how was that for you going from that 100K to then now all of a sudden you're starting to do these multi-million-dollar properties? Like when I come down here and I see multi-million-dollar properties, to me, it takes a little bit to register. I'm like, wow, it's the same. To me, I'm starting to understand it's the same mindset, the same idea to take a $100,000 house and get a buyer for it. It's the same thing as getting a $5 million or a $10 million buyer to buy this house. It's the same kind of thing. How was that shift for you going from those smaller properties to these bigger ones? How was that risk factor, the risk tolerance for you?
It's very simple. Remember, 1.8 GPA. I'm a linear thinker. I'm a simpleton. It's a matter of exercising your risk tolerance like a muscle, exercising your risk threshold like a muscle that you would exercise in the gym. So the biggest risk I ever took, in my opinion, was not the $50 million house we sold on spec. That if I didn't sell it, I would be eating out of a dumpster instead of at Ruth Chris Steakhouse. I would have been bankrupt. That was not the biggest risk. The biggest risk in my life was leaving a $100,000 a year job where I was driving a Ferrari to beautiful oceanfront condominiums and housing projects teaching tennis to beautiful women. I left all of that to buy and sell crack houses. That was a huge risk to leave that safety. That was my cubicle, Zach. That was my 9 to 5. Nobody's born a real estate investor, by the way.
Right.
My job was teaching tennis, just like somebody might be an accountant sitting in front of a screen all day. That was a huge risk to leave the safety of $100,000 a year to do that first $50,000 crack house. So over a 5-year span, doing hundreds of smaller houses, giving credit to Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink, where Gladwell says to be an expert in anything, you have to put in 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours, if you do the math, is 5 years full time. 5 years full time. I became an expert at the craft of real estate over that 5 years. So it was a natural, not stressful progression to go from a $100,000 house to the next level was 2.2 million. Why? Because I had exercised my risk tolerance like a muscle. What I bought on the ocean, our first project on the ocean out of the 44, looked like a crack house, Zach. It had 2 weeks of uncollected newspapers, 2 months of uncut grass and broken windows and torn screens. Looked just like a crack house, but it was on the ocean. So I turned to my wife and said, we can do this. I mean, we sold everything. We moved into an efficiency that was so small, you could flip the eggs from the shower. Like it was so tiny. We were living the lifestyle of the rich and famous. We were living the MTV Cribs life in my late 20s. I sold it all to buy that first oceanfront house. I would have never had the courage and the confidence to do so had I not started exercising my risk tolerance like a muscle. That's what I did. And that's what you got to do if you're going to get to that higher price point. Then listen, I'm afraid every day of my life, but I don't let fear stop me. Big difference.
Of course.
You don't master fear. In Aspire, I think one of the most poignant chapters in Aspire talks about, it's actually a section that deals with fear and how fear is associated with the thought of taking a risk, not with the actual taking of the risk. It's like getting on a roller coaster, Zach. The minute you get on that roller coaster and that bar clanks down across your waist, you're terrified. Your heart's pounding out of your chest. I mean, you're ready to pass out because the blood's not getting to your head. Why? You're freaking out at the thought of what is about to happen. You're sitting safe and sound in that car. Once you get over the top of that first hill, what happens? Joy. You're
having a blast. Yeah.
Having a blast. It's the same thing in business. You get over the thought, the fear associated with the thought of taking a risk, and that risk is almost always associated with a big change or challenge in life. It's just like the roller coaster, because most of us get off that roller coaster. Let's say it's the first business deal and it goes well. And what do? We get off the ride, we go to the front of the line or the back of the line, and we start it all over again. So remember, when you're afraid, like how in the world does he build a $50 million house? Fear is associated with a thought of taking the risk. Take the risk, the fear goes away.
That's a great point to my next question for you, Frank. So reading your book, I started thinking about my own personal experiences with, aspirations and that thing you just brought up with fear. So when somebody's finding their aspiration, and mine, for instance, let me give you an example. So my mom bought her first house when I was 14 years old, single mom. I was an only child, and she was a waitress. And she met this guy. They were together for about 7 years. They bought their first house together. I was 14. I saw the real estate agent pull up with a nice BMW, slicked back hair, looked like the James Bond, nice suit. And I was like, man, I think I want to do that when I'm older. That looks pretty cool. The guy looks clean cut, makes good money, shows properties. That's what I want to do. And so as I got older, my senior project in high school, they call it I think it's called the cumulative project or whatever. You have to do this to graduate. I did it recording my mom's home. Somebody's recording me. I'm in front of the camera showing her property like MTV Cribs would, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I got out of high school, I went to get my real estate license. My mom, not because she was trying to talk me out of it, because I wanted that lifestyle. I wanted that guy's lifestyle. And my mom, she loved me. She wanted to protect me. She told me, Zach, are you really sure you want to do real estate sales? Do you understand there is no guarantee? There is no benefits. There is no paycheck that's guaranteed to you. It's a big risk. Are you sure you want to do it? And if I would have listened to that advice, I think this is also a difference between motivation and inspiration compared to an aspiration. If I would have listened to her and be like, yeah, mom, I think you're right. Like, I don't think I really, that is scary as hell to do something like that. But I went against it and I did it anyway because I had that risk reward factor in my mind. And I did it. I went for it and I failed miserably my first time around. My second time, I've been a massive success with it so far, and I don't plan on stopping. But what advice would you tell somebody where they find their aspiration, they want to go after it, but even their closest friends and family, whether it's out of love or whether it's out of just not wanting to get farther ahead, what's advice you would give to that person who's reaching for that aspiration and wants to go after their dreams?
So what's the subtitle of the book you have right there in front of you?
Aspire, how to create your own reality and alter your DNA.
How to create your own reality. So the reason I subtitled it that is too often, too frequently, other well-intentioned people like your mom or friends who have great, wonderful degrees from universities will be the bug in your ear, encouraging you to pursue something they perceive as safe. Well, nothing's for sure. Nothing's safe. No job is safe. Why get a job? Why not create a job? Why not make a job? And so for me, I did work for somebody. I mean, we've all worked for somebody in their life. Like, what it's like to work for somebody. When I look in the mirror and I think about, all right, let's say I do the rocking chair test. I'm sitting on that porch at 80 years old. I and you listener or viewer, you're going to have regrets. You unequivocally will have regrets. I say, regret what you did, not what you didn't do.
Wow.
I have no issue taking that risk, like say that $50 million house that we were on the cover of USA Today for. There was a guy from MIT who was quoted in that article saying that young man will be dumpster diving in a year. There's no market for a property that expensive, a spec house at $50 million. I'm terrified, Zach. I'm like, this guy's from MIT, and he's telling me I'm going to be dumpster diving in a year because there's no market. So if he would have been right, I would have rather risked going for that versus not if I'm in that rocking chair. He was wrong. 23 days after that article came out, I sold that property for $30 million. It was actually a $30 million house, not 50 at the time. It was a $30 million house. I took a picture of me in a dumpster holding the check, and I sent it to him. And I said, "You are right, sir, Mr. PhD, MIT. You're right. I am dumpster diving, but I got a big fat check in my hand." So it all comes back to what we started talking about, which is taking risk. It doesn't matter if you're going to be the president of the Tupperware club in your neighborhood. To live a full life, a life that you can look back on and say, man, I squeezed every bit of juice out of it. You're going to have to condition yourself to take risks. And I say, people think, oh, you take these huge risks. Zach, it started tiny. So it starts extremely small. Like you said, you started small, you failed miserably, but you got back on and you're now a massive success. These people that are whispering in your ear, they are well-intentioned. Do not condemn them. Do not crucify them. They mean the best. But man, there's a reason I work out of a treehouse. There's a reason I subtitled that book. I am not going to create your own reality. I am not going to allow somebody to create it for me. I'm going to be a proactive optimist to go out and create my own reality. It doesn't always work. In the crash of 2010, I lost millions of dollars, but you know what? I didn't lose everything, and I got back on the horse and have been doing fine since. So, the thing I had going for me, more than most, not more than everybody, but more than most, I didn't have education, I didn't have money, didn't have contacts, didn't have network, didn't have financing, didn't have nothing. But I didn't let fear stop me. That is the primary difference. And now, as I retired and now I unretired, and I'm going to be colonizing the moon metaphorically and making another market like we made in South Florida, because my risk threshold got a little flabby, man. My risk muscle got a little flabby. It's time to get back in the gym and exercise. And if you don't exercise it, you will, especially as I've got a little older, become complacent. Don't get there. Even if you get old and you're in that rocking chair, regret what you did, not what you didn't do.
Frank, hearing you say that, I wrote that down. That gives me goosebumps because in January of 2021, it was June of 2020, I had a very good business in Pennsylvania. I'm selling a lot of real estate, building a team. I have agents, working with me and helping me, and we're building this nice culture. But something was just driving me I hate the cold. Everybody hates the cold, they say, but it just was I saw my buddy Chris, I saw some other people down here that live down here posting in February, ocean views, like on the beach, doing a jog, doing a run. And I'm like, that lifestyle is insane. Like, that's phenomenal. I want to have that lifestyle. We're stuck inside for 6-7 months out of the year. And so what we did was, I think me doing the whole real estate and that risk helped me do this, building that risk tolerance, because in June of 2020, we made a decision. We want that lifestyle. We have this lifestyle now. It's great, but we want more. And so we bought a house here in West Palm Beach in June of 2020, renovated it, and we moved in January of 2021. Bought a second house down here, and we haven't looked back since. And I actually go outside to this day. I take my dog for a walk, 9 o'clock at night, shorts and a tank top. I wake up in the morning, the sun's shining. Frank, it puts a smile on my face. I literally get a smile on my face, and I think to myself, and when I read this book, How to Create Your Own Reality, I tell my wife still to this day, 2 years later, I say, isn't it crazy? Like, people still ask us, why did you make that move? You guys are doing so well. How did you do it? Why would you do it? And it's because I wanted to create this reality. My kids are outside running, riding their four-wheelers. Here we are in December. Like, it's just a different lifestyle. And we created it because we took the risk and we did it. And so just reading that and then hearing you say that, regret what you did, not what you didn't do. So many people call me all the time. I want to do that, but I'm going to wait 5 years, 10 years when my kids are done or this happens. And I'm like, I didn't want to be.
That day may never come. That day may
never come. Yep.
You're young, you think you live forever. It may not be death. It just may be the longer you put it off, the harder it is to do. So do the listeners and the viewers a favor, open up Aspire to the risk section. Okay. So I don't have my book with me, or I'd do it, but open up the book to the risk section and read the names of the titles to those 5 chapters. And there's one I want to jump off on.
All right, so section 2. So you said read off the chapters?
Just the names of the chapters.
So the differentiator.
Okay.
What were you thinking?
Yep.
Risk, R-I-S-K, requires intense self-knowledge.
Yep.
Don't change, redirect, relentless forward motion.
Okay, so we can do all those, but the one I want to do is don't change, redirect. This is a little bit more philosophical, but Sigmund Freud and almost every noted psychiatrist, says we are who we are. Our core person is established, Freud says, by the age of 4. Other psychiatrists go up to the age of 12. So you're not going to change. Nobody listening to this or watching this is going to change. Zach's not going to change. I'm not going to change. One of 3 things is going to happen. In my case, I had a very self-destructive tendency as a teenager that landed me in juvenile detention, that later in my life, my therapist identified as an addiction to excitement. When I was younger, it took a destructive outlet, stealing cars and holding up places at gunpoint, dealing drug, you name it, I did it. I didn't do it for the money, I did it for the thrill. When I got to Florida and I became an adult, so it was no longer going to juvenile detention, I would go to jail, I said, you know what? I love the thrill. I need to find something constructive to replace the destructive tendency that I had for being addicted to risk. Zach, I found a constructive outlet 30 years ago. I haven't changed. What you see here, I mean, in high school, I wore white leather pants. I'm still the same guy. So if you have some tendencies, like say addiction issues, or maybe any kind of addiction issues, or tendencies that are self-destructive, you're not going to change. I give commencement speeches at treatment centers all the time. Not that I've been through treatment, I probably should have, but I never did. You are going to redirect a self-destructive tendency into something constructive. By way of example, instead of stealing cars and getting a thrill out of it, I build spec houses without a buyer in mind. I build houses taking a tremendous amount of risk with the hope that I'll find a buyer. And if I don't, yeah, I'll be eaten out of that dumpster. It's like there's a needle in my arm. I get the thrill. I love doing it, and I make money at it. I'm still taking the risk. I'm still seeking the thrill and excitement, only it's constructive. So that chapter talks about don't change, redirect. For those of you who don't have those tendencies, like self-destructive tendencies like I had, what about the other R word, reigniting? So that person who said to you just a minute ago, I'm going to wait 5 years, and then until the kids are grown, until I've got money in the bank, I'm going to wait. They already have the fire inside them. It is not even smoldering. There's like one little ember that's still burning. My suggestion and what I've witnessed is reignite that now. So if you're not going to redirect, you don't need to redirect because you're not self-destructive. Reignite what's already inside. Take that risk now instead of later, because the time, there's a reason. I'm a Christian. There's a reason the Holy Spirit's telling you, take that risk now. Do it now. When you've reignited or you've redirected, what have you done? You've rewired. You've rewired the brain now to where I will never go back to self-destructive tendencies, even though I'm addicted to excitement still at my age. I have found a constructive outlet. So for those of you, really, in the chapter before that is RISK, requires intense self-knowledge. Requires intense self-knowledge, spells out RISK is an acronym. Get to know yourself. Once you've got to know yourself, you drop down to that, don't change, redirect. By the time you're done with chapter 10, you're ready to take that big risk in life.
I love it, man. Frank, talking about that and then redirecting. In the book, you mentioned about when you're at the top of your game performance-wise, and I this isn't word for word, so please don't quote me on this, but you redirected and you took a passion to go across the United States. Can you tell the viewers and just give myself a glimpse into the You Go, We Go tour and what that was for you and how that changed your life, or how that may have changed, like the impact you think it may have had on other people across the United States?
Yeah, very quickly. So most of you listening or watching have no idea what a Yugo is. So a Yugo, look it up. It's a vehicle. Look it up, read a couple of the humorous stories about it. It was built as one of the least desirable, least successful cars, along with a Pinto and the Pacer and all these other cars that never made it. It was one of the worst cars ever made. Well, I kind of see that as a metaphor for me, right? Like I wasn't supposed to make it. I fell in love with Yugos back in 2005 or 6 on a book tour. Long story short, I have 2 of them. If you look at some of the jokes, like the reason there's the heaters on the back window is not to defrost, is to keep your hands warm when you're pushing this thing. Or the last page of the owner's manual is the bus schedule. Like it's that bad, right? Jokes. So I'm writing Aspire. And I said, you know what? It was at the peak of the pandemic. I said, you know what? I need input on this book. I want to take the pulse of Americana. So instead of flying around or driving my wife's fancy car, I get in my Yugo. 0 to 60 in absolutely never. And I drive 3,000 miles across the country, stop in 22 cities, interviewing people by asking, and this will bring it right, circle back to Aspire. I asked 2 questions. The first question is chapter 2 in the book. This is critical. That's why I put it at chapter 2, right at the beginning, after we identify the difference between motivation, inspiration, and aspiration. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, what legacy do you aspire to leave behind? The answers I got as I was going, no more than 55 miles an hour across the country and stopping at these 23 cities, really opened my eyes and my mind to my own legacy that I aspire to leave behind. And it also says I have to ask that question for people like you, Zach, who are reading the book. Like, that's a question you and your wife should sit down and answer. What legacy do I aspire to leave behind? None of that would have came about if it wasn't for the You Go, We Go tour. After that, so if you're sitting down and you're listening, you're saying, okay, that's kind of morbid, Frank. Like, what legacy do I want to leave behind? It means I have to be dead. That's hard to answer. It is hard to answer. What makes it easier to answer is what happens right after that. How do I make it easier? Identify who you aspire to emulate. Who is it that you look up to, that you could sample a little of their DNA? Like, put your footprints in theirs as they're walking down the beach, that you really think could add to your own, not copying, to add to your own personality. That makes the exercise of answering the question, what do you aspire to leave behind? What legacy do you aspire to leave behind? A lot easier. All that wouldn't have come about had I not hopped in that Yugo at the height of the pandemic and drove from here to Death Valley, California, here being where you are in Florida, Death Valley, California, interviewing a ton of people and driving all the way back.
Wow. No, that stuck out to me as well. And I think I was watching your Facebook as you were doing it and doing all these speeches and everything else. And I mean, you weren't just doing it, you were doing it in homeless shelters, I believe, correct?
I was stopping at, so all my book tours, Zach, we do podcasts, we do TV and radio and all, but we stop at homeless shelters, soup kitchens, juvenile detention centers, food pantries, abused women's facilities, veterans facilities, delivering the messages, plural, of Aspire or The Tap or any of my other books. And so, yeah, that's what I was doing. I was gathering information. And when my new book that comes out on, I'm not going to say, but it comes out in 2023, that if you, I don't know, when is this going to air?
This will air next week.
Okay. So on Friday, the 13th of January, live, I'm going to share something live in Delray Beach, hopefully right where the Christmas tree is. You can go to my social feeds, and by the time this airs, I will have the location and I will have the time. It's free, open to the public. We're going to share a very, let's call it a secret. I'm going to reveal that involves a stunt and a message that I believe everybody can benefit from, which is we all go through adversity, Zach. We all experience some form of adversity. Physical adversity, financial adversity, relational adversity, or spiritual adversity. And we're going to make a pretty big announcement about a secret I'm going to reveal about how to overcome adversity. I'll leave it at that, but go to my social feed. I hope you'll come downtown. I'd love to take pictures with you. Bring your friends. It's free. It's only a half an hour little thing. But
I'll be there.
Yeah, I think bring your wife, bring your kids. It's a kids thing.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely be there. That helps me out. I love hearing that right there, because that's, it's very inspirational. And back to your point about the legacy, it's funny, I was going to ask you this, but you kind of did ask it. Recently, within the last month or so, I heard somebody tell me this, and we all know this we just don't think about it. And it's not, I don't want to be morbid or anything like what you said, but we are all 2 generations away from being forgotten. Yep. Somebody said that to me, and I was like, then they asked me, they follow up that statement with, Zach, do you know who your great grandparents are? I said, no, not really. I never met them. Some people have when they're younger and stuff, but we're all 2 generations away from being forgotten. And I often think about that as well. What legacy do I want to leave behind? And I think as a generation now with YouTube and with videos, we all have the opportunity to just record something and show our family. When our great grandkids ask about us, who was great grandpa? Who were they? What are they known for? You, Frank, you're writing these books. That's an awesome, that's a legacy for you to leave behind, right?
Yeah.
You have masterpieces, oceanfront properties that you are leaving behind. What is, when you are 100 years old, looking back on your life, what is it that you're going to be most proud of?
Well, let me segue into that. So how old are you?
I'm 34.
Okay. So you have 43 summers left, according to the average age in America when people die. The average age is 77 years and some months. So you've got 34 plus 43, 77 years. You got 43 summers left. Getting you back on that rocking chair and that regret what you did, not what you didn't do. The most important thing I hope that your listeners or viewers take away is that legacy that you leave behind absolutely must involve your spiritual highest calling. What I mean by that, so most younger people would think, oh, Frank, your legacy is going to be your books, or it's going to be, your oceanfront houses. Zach, one of the ones that's on the cover of my first book that I wrote 20 years ago, this $12 million house, it's already gone. It's already torn down because the land underneath it rendered the structure physically, functionally, and economically obsolete. It's gone. My legacy will not be these oceanfront homes. My legacy, of course, the books will live on. My spiritual highest calling is the 30 self-sustaining villages that our Caring House Project Foundation has built in the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, that being Haiti. So without turning anybody off, and don't turn me off or don't turn Zach's podcast off, from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verse 48, comes this phrase, to whom much is entrusted, much is required. To whom much is given, much is expected. So if you're not into the Bible, atheist, agnostic, Hindu, Muslim, Jew, don't matter. You don't have to be a Christian. That's a great life mantra. To whom much is given, much is expected. The success I've achieved was a gift. It was given. I didn't study for it. I didn't have a silver spoon handed to me. I was an idiot. I was a delinquent. I take that gift, that responsibility very seriously. So being a linear thinker, 1.8 GPA, like a simpleton, I provide housing to the world's most wealthy who really don't even need another house. They have houses all over the world. I'm good at it. That's my professionalized calling. It'd be a sin if I didn't do it. Like, that's a gift God gave me to do. But Frank, what about your spiritual highest calling? Shouldn't you be providing housing to the world's most desperately poor and homeless? Not out of requirement, not out of obligation, out of responsibility to that statement, that passage, to whom much is entrusted, much is required. So 20 years ago, Zach, we went to Haiti and we started building self-sustaining villages. 20 years later, 13,600 children now enjoy a self-sustaining existence because of our presence there. We fund those villages through the sale of our houses, through donations from other people, and through book sales. I make no money from the sale of my books. I make my money in real estate. So every single book that I've sold, including all the copies of Aspire, dating all the way back to Make It Big 20 years ago, all the proceeds fund the operations of Caring House Project. By the way, one book, the book you were just holding up, provides 200 meals in one of our orphanages.
Wow. So
when you close the chapter on this little podcast and you think about, Frank gave me a lot to think about, legacy wise, what is your spiritual highest calling? Unfortunately, most of us spend our entire lives pursuing our professional highest calling to the detriment of never knowing what the spiritual highest calling is. Zach, I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was on top of the world. I had lost all the heart in my soul. I was very depressed. I sold the most expensive spec house in the history of Palm Beach County. I was on the front cover of the Miami Herald. My smile was fake. I was a consumerist. I was a materialist. I was a jerk. And I was so depressed. I went to my mentor and I said, man, I'm supposed to be feeling good. Like, I made it. Why do I feel like, and I don't curse very often, I don't feel like shit. Like, what's going on? And he asked me, Frank, have you found your spiritual highest calling? I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I know how to build oceanfront mansions. He says, why are you doing that? I said, I'm good at it to make more money. Why do you need more money? Well, I just want a bigger house. Why do you want a bigger house? Well, my one's too small. I need more garage. Why do you need another garage? I need more car. Frank, what? Shut up. You just want to be happy. That's what you're telling me. And you're not, because you focused on the consumeristic and the materialistic side instead of the altruistic and that spiritual highest calling side. And that moment, Zach, I started volunteering at a soup kitchen, serving meals to the homeless 1 hour a week before Monday Night Football. I started to get in touch with my spiritual highest calling, and the heart returned to my soul. Had I not had that conversation, had I not had that depression, had I not volunteered 1 hour a week at the Caring Kitchen, that was the name of it, there would be no Caring House, and there wouldn't be 20 villages in 30 villages in 20 years and 13,000 kids. So that we've kind of jumped to the end of Aspire, that talks about moving from rich to enriched.
But that's great to wrap this up with that, because I love that. Because sometimes I feel the same way. If I'm selling real estate, I sell my biggest deal I've ever sold. I'm supposed to be happy. My wife wants to go celebrate. I'm like, okay, it's just another day at the office. So I guess my last thing to wrap this up, somebody who is not financially, like they like you said, most people spend so much time trying to get their professional and their business right, but they either have a job, they're struggling, they don't have that, they don't have enough money in the bank to feel comfortable to be able to attack their spiritual highest calling. What advice would you provide somebody? Like, do you think somebody should, kind of a professional question, should they get into sales? Should they start learning a different skill set to be able to, like a high dollar skill set to be able to put more money in the bank? That way they have a cushion to go after their spiritual highest calling. Like, where do you think that miscommunication is on people who just every day they're worried about money and work versus that highest calling?
Okay, so the assumption you're making is that the spiritual highest calling is tied to the availability of funds to make that spiritual highest calling come true because of what we've done in Haiti. I understand why you're doing that. It took money. Each village cost me 300 grand to build, which isn't a lot. I'm building 50 houses plus a community center, school, church, clinic, all that for 300 grand. I mean, it's insane how far we can stretch the dollar. Before you have the treasure, before you have the talent, you've got the first T. In the Bible, you've heard time, talent, treasure. You've got the time, Zach. Your listeners have the time to do what I did, not exactly, but I volunteered my time at a soup kitchen because I had lost all the heart in my soul. I was depressed. I had to find out why. Soon, that time I volunteered and gave up turned into a talent. And that talent was we would go in the bad neighborhoods, and instead of fixing crack houses and flipping them, we'd fix them and rent them to elderly homeless people for $1 a month. Okay, so now we're making it somewhere. And then eventually, I had the treasure along with other donors. We have a lot of donors to Caring House to be able to share that treasure by building these self-sustaining villages in Haiti. So start with a time. Right now, do not wait. Please do not wait until you think you have enough money in the bank, because you've got plenty of time in the bank. You got all the time in the world in the bank to start cultivating and learning what that spiritual highest calling is. Zach, I will leave you with this. The moment you can dovetail your professional highest calling with your spiritual highest calling, bring those two together. I sell houses to the rich, like Robin Hood. I take the money and I build and I give to the poor. You will skip over happiness and land on joy, because with all your pursuits, I'm going to use you as an example. With all your pursuits, your wife, you succeed, you go out to dinner, money will provide two things in all the abundance you can imagine: relief and comfort. It stops there. It becomes a maddening cycle for you and your wife to assume that the relief and comfort, the excitement and the thrill that you get equals happiness. It took me a long time, like decades, to figure that out. The relief and comfort, the thrill and the excitement I get is not happiness, Zach. It's just that. It's fleeting. The joy comes from finding that spiritual highest calling.
That's phenomenal. Frank, I want to just thank you so much for your time. I have a ton of notes here. We went a little bit longer than I expected. I do apologize for that. But I thank you so much for your time. This has been a phenomenal interview. I wish I had more time with you, but I appreciate what you did with the book. I can't wait to hear about the new book that's coming out. I'm going to put in the description, guys, I'm going to put something in there for Frank's new book that's going to be coming out, any kind of announcements he'll be making. And if you guys want to get in touch with Frank, Frank, can I put your Facebook page below as well?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing you want to do, put in theaspirebook.com, theaspirebook.com. That way they can go and they can get the copy of the book. If they're not sure they want to buy the book, Zach, there's a sample chapter on there. There's a sample Audible chapter that I actually narrate myself. So the whole book is on Audible that I narrated. And then, yeah, go to social and come with Zach to the Friday the 13th big secret reveal. That's going to be fantastic. I mean, it's really designed to benefit you and the adversities, spiritual, financial, relational, or dietary that you suffer. So we'll see you on Friday the 13th of January. In the meantime, pick up Aspire at theaspirebook.com.
Perfect. Guys, thank you so much. Frank, again, thank you a lot. I appreciate your time.
See you guys.